Speak now to Daniel Levy, who's the president of the US Middle East Project. He joins us also from London. Daniel, I'd like to take into consideration both of these cases that have happened in the UK at the moment. If Parliament approves the order against Palestine action, they will join the 81 organisations that have been prescribed under the Terrorism Act. They include, for our viewers, Hamas, Al-Qaeda, far-right groups such as National Action, and the Russian private military company Wagner. Who does this proscription benefit, and what's really driving it, in your opinion, Daniel?
I think it benefits the discrediting of Western democratic politics. I can't see who else it benefits. It benefits politicians making a mockery of themselves, because this is something that, if it weren't so serious, should be laughed at. Unfortunately, and shame on this government, what they will try and achieve, and what they will achieve if this goes through, is a 2-for-1. They will both be able to continue continue their complicity in running cover for Israel's criminal actions, genocidal actions in Gaza, and they will also continue to use the case of Israel and their support for Israel as a way of peeling back the civil liberties of every citizen in this country. That's what they've been doing in the way they've tried to prescribe the protests, the routes of protests, the limitations on the protests around this issue. And that's what they're doing with this intent to list Palestine direct action. And let's be clear, when people undertake this kind of an action, they know that they are acting in contravention of the law. That's part of the decision to undertake this. That's part of drawing attention to the issue, because it's going to be something of an uproar. They know they will face legal consequences. That's part of operating in a democracy, but also operating in a rule of law. What they do not expect is a government to recklessly and shamelessly then expand definitions of terror legislation to try and catch people up in this. If you're going to a protest, if you're wearing a T-shirt, they can spread this net very widely. And you know, it will have consequences for people campaigning on all kinds of other issues going forward.
Interesting that the vote in Parliament will be bundled together with two other organisations that are also being debated as to whether or not they should be prescribed. One of them, as our correspondent Milena said, is a neo-Nazi movement. I mean, the fact that these different organisations are all being thrown together, what does that say to you about the level of desperation on behalf of the government at the moment to try and assign a label to Palestine action?
It's farcical, I'm afraid. The Prime Minister of the UK apparently is intervening more aggressively and putting more political capital into the game to allow the crimes that we witness in Gaza to continue. What's happening with this so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the killing of people at aid distribution centres, the killing of people at cafes, the ethnic cleansing, the kettling. The Prime Minister is doing more to intervene in that, in allowing that to continue, doing more with this legislation, doing more with intervening with what gets broadcast from Glastonbury, the biggest festival in this country, music festival in this country, which bands should play at Glastonbury. He seems much more bothered by those things than by the huge and horrific violations of international law and criminal acts that are happening, apparently with British facilitation, in Gaza and elsewhere. This is a man with a history as a lawyer. He knows this area. He knows what he's doing is wrong, but only if there is enough pressure will they desist from doing so. So far, the public is not with the government on this. Let's see if the public's elected representatives also kowtow to this nonsense.
Yeah, and we saw public discontent with how all of this is being played out in Glastonbury, as you mentioned there. In the last few minutes, we've just learned that one of the artists, the punk rap artist Bob Vylan, has just had his US visa revoked, so he won't be able to go on tour in the United States as a result of what transpired on stage at Glastonbury a few days ago. I wonder how Israel perhaps benefits from all of this, including a ban going ahead against Palestine action?
I think there are two ways of looking at it, Neve. Israel, in its position of trying to continue to prosecute these crimes against the Palestinians, trying to pursue what it depicts as total victory, Israel will see this as another success. It encourages Israeli society down this path, by the way, because if Israel looks at it and says, wait a minute, maybe we're doing something wrong. No, it's okay. Our Western friends continue to give us backing. They continue to call out our opponents, not us, for what we're doing. I would argue that if you look on a longer time horizon, this further indulges the moral hazard of telling Israel, do your worst. What could possibly go wrong if you create more anger, more radicalization, more destabilization in the region, if you create another generation of people who simply cannot live with your presence because you refuse to live with their presence. So I would say that this is suicidal for the international legal architecture and institutions we've established. It's suicidal for the whatever reputation remains of Western democracies, and it's suicidal for Israel. But those who pay the price in the meantime are Palestinians and those who seek to do the right thing in standing for justice with
Daniel,
the Palestinians.
on the fighter jet ruling, the judges said the case has not been about whether the UK should supply arms or other military equipment to Israel, but whether the court could rule that Britain must withdraw from the international F-35 programme, and that the issue is not for the courts but for the government. I mean, it implies that the UK is hamstrung or simply choosing to prioritise its security commitments to NATO, the United States and Lockheed Martin, the manufacturers, rather than its commitments to human rights.
Well, what's important in that, perhaps, Neve, is that the court has not ruled on the case as to whether violations of international law, war crimes, are being committed by Israel using the F-35s in Gaza. What they have said is that they do not believe the court has a say in terms of the separation of powers within the UK system on this issue. It is an issue for Parliament to decide. Again, this throws it back to the representatives of the public. And yes, that in one sense speaks to a filialty over international law to the military-industrial complex. It also speaks to the broader implications here, which is the argument the government made all along of the F-35 program being a multi-country program. What the court hasn't done, therefore, is said, no, all is hunky-dory, no violations of international law. And I think what that tells us is there is a lot more to be done inside the court system. Only 10% of the arms license exports were stopped by the government in September 2024. There are other cases in terms of the complicity under law of the British leadership in making the decisions they've made. There are questions regarding Israelis who may visit the UK who have committed war crimes that they themselves have often documented and posted. There are questions regarding British companies and banks and their complicity in the violations of international law in the provision of certain materials. So we haven't heard the last word from the law courts. I wish it didn't depend on the law courts, but that is one of the avenues of recourse. And of course, what we see is that for Palestinians, every legal, non-violent course of action being closed down. Is that smart? I would argue no.
Daniel, always good to hear your thoughts. Daniel Levy there, President of the US Middle East Project.